Every problem contains in itself the seed of its own solution. And that seed is human consciousness. And consciousness is our ability to recognize patterns and meanings that are going on with respect to that which is within us and around us in society. True consciousness is looking at something and then asking why something is the way it is. And true consciousness can either be raised through knowledge or it can be manipulated through knowledge. And unfortunately, 98% of people in today's society are being manipulated by those that do have this true knowledge and wield it against the masses. Because if someone doesn't understand how mind control operates, then they don't have the tools to even understand they're being manipulated by people who do have an understanding of how these mind control techniques work. Mind control is a multifaceted set of techniques that places within someone or a group of people a programming of core belief systems that the receiver or receivers take as true and then act upon in the real world. So in this video, we'll be talking about how to effectively save ourselves from these mind control techniques that are constantly being wielded upon us as weapons by the powers that should not be. And the first way to do that is to have an understanding of the structures within our brain, because our brain is the instrument that consciousness uses to express itself. So that's what we're going to cover in this video. It's going to be extremely informative, and I can guarantee you haven't heard a video like this before. And by the end of this series, you're going to have an entirely new perspective on what true consciousness means and how to avoid this massive manipulation that's going on in today's society. So like we talked about in the last video, consciousness breaks down and then manifests in two separate ways. The first way is through an internal, indwelling, feminine, or receptive manifestation of consciousness. And this is relating to the moon or the mother. It's the emotional quality and the yin quality of consciousness. And it's also associated with the right brain hemisphere. The second way is through an external or more dominant masculine manifestation of consciousness. This is relating to the sun or the father. It's logical, and it's the yang quality of consciousness, and it's associated with the left brain hemisphere. The human brain is part of the discovery of self. Yet, if you go to the average person on the street or in your family or one of your friends, they don't even realize the true power that they carry between their own ears. They don't understand any of the components that make up the brain, nor do they even understand how the brain operates. And even more sad than that is they don't even understand what qualities of their own consciousness is driven by what part of the brain and why this even is. And this is extremely sad. Because if someone doesn't understand the most sacred gift they've ever been given outside of free will, which is the brain, then that person won't even understand how what's going on in the world can either be used to assist or control your behavior. So what we're going to explore in this video is how the structures in the brain are directly connected and tied to the fundamental human motivations within all of us. The lowest part of the human brain and the simplest in terms of structures of the human brain exists in the lower parts or the lower half of the brain. I'll pop up the image right here. But think about how interesting this is. It's like laying the foundation of the house if you're building a house. The foundation of the house is the part you lay down first. It's the lowest level of the house because you can't build on top if you don't have a foundation there to begin with. There has to be some sort of foundation to build upon. So this base part of the brain is called the R complex. And the R in R complex stands for reptilian. So it's the reptilian brain or the reptilian complex of the brain. It's the lowest part of the brain. And it's this part of the brain that's responsible for all of our physical activities, which is essentially all of our motor skills. The R complex it's basically two components. It's the brainstem, which connects to the spinal column, as you can kind of see the top half here. And then behind that, or near the back of the head, as you can see here, there's a region called the cerebellum. And these are the two components of the brain that govern our motor skills. And without this part of the brain, you wouldn't be able to move your arms, your mouth, your legs. You wouldn't be able to walk, you wouldn't be able to talk, you wouldn't be able to run. So it's responsible for all the movements and contractions within the muscular structure of the body. So it's an extremely vital part of just getting by every single day that we need to use. However, aside from all these cool things it does, it governs some of the most basic and primitive parts of our consciousness and our behaviors that at some point we have to either use or we've seen it on display with other people. And you might have heard of this as the fight or flight mechanisms of consciousness. And this came about because when we were a less evolved being, we had to engage predators in the wild that then forced us to make a split-second decision on whether we could stand our ground and fight the predator if we had the right weapons and the right energy to do so, or we could choose to flee and get the hell out of Dodge and flee from this predator in order to survive. Because this part of the brain, the R complex, is all about survival. It's all about what we need to do to survive. It governs eating, sleeping, and anything we need to do to survive in the physical world that we live in. And the fight or flight response is what we do when our survival is being threatened. And during this fight or flight state of mind, the heart begins to pump blood very quickly away from two areas of the body and then towards two other areas of the body. So when we go into this fight or flight response, or this is also called stress, the R complex of the brain sends instructions to the human heart and says, essentially, pump blood faster, or pump it away from the torso and the head. And this is extremely important to know because in the torso are all our vital organs. And in our head, obviously, is the brain. So when we're in a stressful situation where the R complex is activated and we're in the fight or flight response, fresh oxygenated blood is being pumped away from our brain and our vital organs to our extremities. And this is because when you're making a decision about whether you're going to fight or run away, once that decision's made, in a situation where you're being preyed upon, you're not going to need blood in those areas of the body. That's not a top priority given the situation, because blood needs to go to your arms and your legs so you can either fight off the predator when blood gets pumped into your arms with your fist or a weapon nearby, or you can use your legs to get the hell out of Dodge and run away from whatever it is that's preying upon you. So you're not going to be needing any blood in your vital organs to do digestion or pump your heart properly, nor are you going to need any fresh oxygenated blood going into your brain so you can think about deep philosophical ideas while you're being hunted down by a mountain lion. It's just not the wisest thing to do in a situation like that. So how does this apply in the modern world? Well, in the modern world, we're not really faced with situations where we're challenged with something that can threaten our very being, where we have to run or fight something off. Let's hope not, right? Let's hope we're not in a situation like that consistently. But what we are faced with, especially in the Western world and culture, is stressful day-to-day living just to get by, just to make a paycheck. And surprisingly, this activates the fight or flight, or the R complex of the brain, the majority of the day for most people. So what was once an advantageous part of the brain structure that could help us either flee or fight off a predator in a life or death situation has now become a detriment to society. This is because what we've been doing with this function mainly is essentially we're staying most of the hours of the day in this reptile brain construct of consciousness. Think about it. Most people in the West go from one stressful thing to the next, living a busy lifestyle with a job, children, sitting in traffic on the way to work, all while doing physical activities in between their work and coming home. And then to add the cherry on the top, they're dealing with other people all the time that they really don't want to deal with. And they do this almost every waking hour of the day. And because of this constant engagement in the reptile brain, instead of coming back down like we used to in the past where we go to a normal brain state, we're constantly in this lower stressful brain frequency. Most people spend their lives trapped in the reptile brain. And because of this does some very harmful things to the rest of our brain structures, which we'll talk about how this happens in a second. But first, before we get into such great news about how the brain gets offset and we go into the R complex of the brain and destabilize the rest of the brain, you have to realize what the other components of the brain are so we can piece this puzzle together and truly understand what happens when we dwell in the R complex or reptile brain. The mammal brain, also called the limbic system, sits right above our reptile brain. It governs our emotional makeup and the chemical interactions through which we experience our emotions. Again, like we talked about, this is the feminine internal quality of consciousness. And this part of the brain's also been called the midbrain or the middle chamber in some occult or religious traditions. But here's what's really important about this part of the brain. Without it, we wouldn't be able to experience any emotions. Just think of it in relation to a reptile. A reptile doesn't have a mammal brain. They only have a reptilian brain. They're creatures of instinct that are only interested in their own survival. Cold-bloodedness is a feature of a reptile. They don't really experience emotions the way that you see mammals experience emotions. Just think about a crocodile in relation to a dog and a chimpanzee. A dog and a chimpanzee really experience emotional states that are quite different than a crocodile. A crocodile is largely a creature of instinct. You can actually see the chimpanzee and the dog go from happy to sad and experience many other emotional states. And the crazy thing is, we actually share these two parts of the brain with different species in the animal kingdom. But there's a part of the brain that makes us really unique and at a higher level of organization and consciousness than anything else we've ever seen in the animal kingdom and in the universe itself. And that is the human brain. And this image right here of the human brain, this is what most people think of when they think of the brain. They think of the gray matter part of the brain that looks like intestines on top of your head. And this part of the brain is called the telencephalon. The part of the brain where most of the neural activity takes place for the human is in the outer portion of the telencephalon. You can see it right here. And this outer portion is called the neocortex. And this is the part of the brain that governs all the higher order thinking of an individual. Every quality that really makes us human. And we have this as a result of a highly developed neocortex. This is the part of the brain that separates us from all the other animals in the animal kingdom. The neocortex is bilaterally symmetrical, meaning we have a left brain and a right brain. The left brain hemisphere is the male aspect of the brain. It governs analytical thought, logic, scientific thought, mathematical thought, and the languages we speak. On the other side of the neocortex is called the right brain. This carries the yin and the feminine qualities of the human makeup. The right brain governs intuition, creativity, and holistic thought. Or it's a fancy way of saying the idea and understanding that we are all connected and there is no separation from the all. So all of these qualities of consciousness that are more feminine come from the right side of the brain, the right hemisphere. Which is why when we hear someone say when they're talking about the right brain, we're in our right mind. Or on the other hand, we're not in our right mind. Because if we don't have a connection to this part of the brain, we're really not in our right mind, so to speak. And it's not just a play on words. That's where we get the saying right mind from. So if we go to the metaphor that we talked about earlier about how consciousness itself has a threefold aspect, well, just as consciousness has a threefold aspect, which is our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions, our brain also has a triune nature. Neuroscientists call this the triune brain. It's the 3-in-1 brain. Tri meaning three, obviously, and then un or yun meaning one. You have the reptile brain, the mammal brain, and the human brain. We are basically three beings in one. And yes, there is a hierarchy to this. There's a way that information should be processed according to this threefold or triune system if the brain is properly functioning. And what I mean by saying a brain that functions properly is that there's a balance between the left and the right brain hemispheres. Scientists actually call this global EEG coherence. It means that your left brain and your right brain hemispheres are both firing in unison and in harmony. And the neural activity and the electrochemical synaptic activity is fully working and alive and lit up on both halves of the brain, not just on one side or the other side. This is a person that has a brain firing on all cylinders, so to speak. A person with this lives in balance and harmony with others and their environment. The human brain, ruling over all that is beneath it, is designed to be the executive command center of the whole brain complex. It's the part of the brain that deals with higher order thought. You can basically think of this part of the brain like the CEO of a company. The CEO is a person that makes all the critical decisions. Well, the CEO is like the neocortex. And just like the CEO, this part of the brain governs reason. It governs the way we use our actions in balance with our emotions. So, if we have a balanced neocortex and one side doesn't dominate the other side, we don't have an imbalance to the left brain hemisphere and we don't have an imbalance to the right brain hemisphere. We become a person essentially that's capable of now having higher order thinking or conceptual thinking. And because of that thinking, reasonable behavior, meaning behavior that's governed through the ability to reason, recognize patterns, and recognize meanings with respect to the patterns. This is truly the greatest gift that our species possesses. It's the most advanced supercomputer that we'll probably ever know or discover in the entire universe, and it's sitting right behind your ears. And if this part of the brain is properly functioning based on the structures that we went over, you can see that we are then in touch with the sacred feminine or mammal limbic structure of the brain beneath, which allows us as humans to experience emotions. In fact, the mammal brain is always sending data upwards towards the neocortex. Think about it. The spiritual part of the brain, or the sacred feminine part of the brain, which governs our emotions, is always trying to send data upwards to the reasoning functions of the brain, which is the logical, analytical left brain and the creative, nurturing, and intuitive right brain. So if the brain's functioning properly, this is how it works. The human brain sends instructions down to the mammal brain or the sacred feminine emotional brain. The emotional brain then takes this information and through reason or mindfulness and mindful thinking is able to relay a message down to the reptilian brain. And then through our motor skills and our behaviors in the world that the reptile brain is responsible for, we are then able to act with reason and right thinking in the physical world. So now that you understand this, what do you think happens when we're constantly either in balance towards one brain hemisphere or the other brain hemisphere? Well, different things happen depending on the nature of the imbalance. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about the specific mind control methodologies that are implemented by the powers that should not be on the human population to swing us in either the left brain imbalance or the right brain imbalance. And this has happened to all of us. All of us at some point were under some form of manipulation or control, putting us in one half of the brain state or the other half of the brain state for a collective common goal by this elitist group. But in this video, I just wanted to warm you guys up to how the brain functions, why it's so important to understand this, and the different halves of the brain and the structures of the brain and how information is sent from the human brain down to the limbic system and then to the R complex, which then governs how we behave in the world. It's very important to know because the mastermind psychologists can swing us depending on information they send us and techniques, which we'll be talking about, in one brain state or another, and keep us controlled instead of thinking holistically with both halves of our brain. So if you're interested in seeing that, you want to see more videos like this in the future, be sure to drop a like, let me know what you think about all of this, and I'll see you guys next week Have a blessed rest of your day. Stay safe.